Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to WGES 2025. What a better way to start this summit than talking about resilience? Because if you look at it, resilience was what this decade was all about. So in 2024, climate crisis have cost our global economy more than $320 billion. And I'm not talking about casualties because we cannot put a cost tag on this. So it's not just these numbers. It's a wake-up call for all of us. And this is why resilience and innovation, they are no longer something optional. But we do have a hopeful part. Technology is stepping up. And we look at it from smart buildings that can face the extreme heats, to batteries that can keep the lights on our streets when there are storms, to circular economy that can turn waste into value. So we do see these technologies, but the question remains, how can we step up those solutions? And this is what our panel discussion is all about. Saeed, let me start with you. So today, where do you see the biggest gaps? Let's look at the big picture first when it comes to making our societies more resilient. Is it finance? Is it policy? Is it regulations? Is it technology?
Very good question. And I think, look, as you explained, resilience is definitely the key point now for cities and economies globally, and whether that's resilience to heat stress, resilience to flooding, resilience to water scarcity, droughts. It really is going to be what becomes the coming theme of the decades ahead. In terms of the gaps, I don't think there's any specific area. To me, it's more the integration. You know, finance is available. Finance is ready to deploy to tackle, climate, to advance net zero, to advance resilience. Policy is there. Policy is moving, and technology is actually almost leading the way. But I think where the gap is how well is that integrated? Is regulations adapting and evolving fast enough at the pace of technology and also the pace of the need to upgrade and adapt cities for resilience? Is finance being deployed in the most effective means, in the most effective and efficient means to the right types of projects? And how are those projects being secured? There's still a gap. There's a lot of large finance institutions that we work with that have huge amounts of capital to deploy, and they're a bit stuck of how do we deploy this? How do we find bankable projects that have meaningful returns, that have meaningful impact? So I think it's more the integration. I think sessions like this, the World Green Economy Organization as a whole and the work they do year-wide, these types of summits where we bring policymakers, finance institutions, technology providers together to really try and provide that integration and mesh so that we can all advance the resilience agenda more effectively.
We will get into more details, Saeed, when it comes to these parts and how to close these gaps. Stwart, let's move into circular materials, and this is what your company is all about. So, of course, circular materials are seen as a vital part for resilience. But yet, when we look at the adoption, it is really very slow. Why?
That is a very good question. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to speak about this topic in this stage. So for a little bit of context, Microcycle is a venture that's creating circular plastics and textiles. And when we're thinking about building a business, there's like 3 core pillars that we need to build in order to have a sustainable growing business. And those are supply, manufacturing, and offtake. And in the circularity industry, unfortunately, I believe all 3 of those pillars are challenges that are slowing the adoption to circularity. Let's start with the first pillar, supply. The reality is that at a global scale, we are not collecting enough. And because we're not collecting enough materials, whether it's plastic, textiles, metals, minerals from waste sources, it is rather expensive to try to source waste feedstock. So let's focus specifically on like PET plastic. Right now, we do have a lot of collection, but even at a global rate, it's only 20-30%. And as a result, it's quite expensive to be able to source those materials. Imagine if that 20 to 30% increased to 80%. Suddenly, the price would basically more than half. And now you have access to a cheaper feedstock to be able to compete with the virgin materials that are being produced from any of those technologies. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is manufacturing. Right now, we haven't had the technologies to be able to profitably and with strong unit economics manufacture new materials from waste. Now, we are developing those technologies, but the reality is they need time to develop. They need time to be able to reach economies of scales. And because we're not there yet, as a result, it is expensive. It's high operationally expensive to be able to manufacture anything, regardless of the feedstock cost, into the final material. The last pillar is offtake. The customers have a hard time adopting such circular materials. And the main two reasons for that is because it is usually expensive, and especially in our current macroeconomic environment where things are becoming more and more expensive, the companies want to be able to maintain their margins and their profits, and it's quite difficult to make the economic rationale for paying more if the customers don't desire as much. And then the second one is the quality. Because waste material is so difficult to handle, the quality of the final product tends to be lower. And if you ask your customers to try to change their processes to adopt new solutions, it becomes quite difficult for them to fully revamp their manufacturing processes just to use something more circular, but it may not look as good or be as good. So collectively, you have the supply, the manufacturing, and the offtake, and those are all challenges that we have to overcome collectively. Now, I do believe that when you overcome one of those pillars almost all the way, it will enable the other two. So it's not like all three have to be overcome collectively at the same time, but we do need to make our best efforts to try to work on them and see which one we can actually bridge the gap soonest to enable the other two pillars to build along, to enable a truly circular economy and expedite the adoption rate of circular materials.
Oh, interesting, but it sounds like it's a long way ahead. We'll come into also more details. Seneca, let me move to you now. Everybody knows Al-Shaya group in the region.
I hope so.
Of course, it's one of the biggest groups. So we do know it very well. But so you're coming from a corporate perspective, and if I want to ask you, what does resilience look like in the practice, working for a big like a corporate like yours? It's like supply chain redundancy, sourcing differently, engaging customers. Give me the image of it.
So really, resilience for us is about transparency, because we need to be able to see what's happening in our supply chain in order for us to make sure that we're addressing the risks so that we are resilient going on into the future. And I think the first enabler of that, the primary enabler of that is technology. So in order to see deep into our supply chain, we're looking at supply chains for a shy of, we've got upwards of 10,000 vendors across probably 100 different countries. So it's very difficult as a company to see through that. And so we need to start adopting more technology, and we're trying to adopt more technology in order to address that so that we can see. One of the ways that we're doing that is through SEDEX. SEDEX is an online platform where our vendors can input all of the necessary ethical trade standards that we're requiring of them. And then we're able to see it, compare it, and it provides us with a risk score so that we can understand where we have risk, and then we can address it. And then we can use that also to train our vendors, to help them understand and grow along with us in sustainability. And recently, everyone's talking about AI and the power of AI. I think AI is the unlocker to that transparency. I've been investigating a software called Metis, which is an AI-based platform that creates supply chain transparency. We can put in all of our vendors into one platform, and it can automatically, using AI, tell us the inherent risk in the country, in the commodities that they're selling, and give us all of this information really at a touch of a button. And so that's where we need to go. We need to incorporate more technology to create that transparency so that we can see what's going on in our supply chain. We can manage that risk, and we can make the necessary changes.
All right. Amazing. Saeed, so today, from a GC's perspective, what are we learning from global best practices when it comes to climate resilient urban design? Or is it the other way around? We have to teach now. How do we do these urban cities?
Very interesting question. I mean, I have the fortune, we have offices throughout the world, so work in Sydney, Singapore, Cape Town, London, Dubai, throughout the Middle East, Africa. And traveling to all these different regions where we work on urban development, building projects, there's a huge amount that the rest of the world can learn from what we've developed and adapted here. When you look at, dense urban development, high-rise skyscrapers, developing high-rise buildings in a sustainable manner, really the GCC is leading the way globally on that. There's a lot of innovation that we're very, very far ahead of the rest of the world in terms of the development of mega projects at scale. Most of that has been happening here over the last 20 years, so there's a lot of learnings from that. So there's different areas that you can learn from different perspectives, and I think that's really the global mindset. In Singapore, they've done some phenomenal work around sort of water scarcity, water protection, because all water in Singapore is imported. So for them, it's a national security aspect to make sure that they've got these things addressed. So there's a lot of learnings there. For instance, their infrastructure networks for sort of leak detection and response from an IoT perspective are really world class. So I think the approach that we need to take is, as global citizens, is we can all learn from each other. There isn't an importing of ideas, from the West, or an importing ideas from one side to another. There's things we're doing well, there's things we're doing not so well, and I think that can be applied everywhere in the world. That we have that open mindset of learning from each other and teaching, as well. I think when we're talking about resilience and climate response, it really can't be competitive. I think it's an element of raising the bar across the board from a company's perspective and from a country's perspective.
What we're not doing well here?
I
can see so many well things.
I think the integration element is an important part. Look, the speed of development here is faster than anywhere in the world. The speed of action is faster than anywhere in the world. With that, the need for integrating response is key, and that's from an urban fabric level, integrating the infrastructure with the buildings and built environment when you're talking about the technology engineering. But to my earlier point, making sure that we're aligning policy with what is the technology best practice, and making sure that feedback loop is happening quickly, I think is key.
Awesome. Stwart, let's go back to recycling for a moment. And these technologies that we do have today, are they good enough to make circularity like mainstream? Or, I mean, you touched on different points, but the technology that is available now, do you think is it enough, or we need something else to make like a bigger leap?
That is a good question. So Bill Gates, I think himself said that we currently have all the technologies that we need for the next 50 years. Now we just need to get them out of the labs and the ecosystem and incubators and scale them up. Do I believe we need more technologies? Absolutely. But I do believe that we have the current tools right now to be able to actually start coming up with very concrete and strong solutions. The biggest issue is that they're simply not at scale. And part of the reason, I think, is a little bit of a mismatch when it comes to communicating why they're not at scale yet. When we think about like the linear economy, we have had a century, if not more than a century, to be able to develop those infrastructures. As a result, they are very economically attractive to the current world. But the circular economy technologies have had, what, maybe a decade, maybe 2 decades on the grand scheme where they've had time to develop. If we're able to shift our perspective a little bit from the short term to the long term, we may be able to find circular technologies, like what I believe Microcycle is building, that if you give it enough time to develop at the same scale and infrastructure, can create an even what you call a green discount, where you enable those technologies to actually lower the current cost barriers that exist today. So when I think of like what is it that we need to do, we definitely need more innovation, but a lot of the focus actually has to be on funding the technologies that can actually achieve that price parity and eventually the green discount to enable mass adoption of circular material. Especially with all the uncertainty that is going on in the macroeconomic environment, funding those technologies is going to be very critical to ensure we get to that stage where we can start enjoying the benefits of having circular economies on a more local infrastructure level.
So when
Can
you
I
talk
jump
about
in there?
this counter,
Can I just jump in there? Because I think that's an important point, and I think that's where the corporates like Ashaya, like the Shahoobs, like the Americanas, especially in this region, we have a unique opportunity because we have businesses of scale here that are very diverse, and we're a great playground for some of these technologies that need to pilot, that need to test. We're the playground. We're working with Ericsson to launch their connected recycling platform, and this is software. We did a pilot with them as they were developing the software, and we were able to use their technology to track and trace our recyclables through the recycling process and turn that PET recyclable into new products that we could bring back into our store. So they would not have had an opportunity to test something with an organization of our size had I not jumped in and said, hey, let's try this. And so that's what we have to do as corporates in this region. We have to jump in and give those technologies, those new technologies, the playground that they need so that they can test, so that they then can prove their concept, and then they can expand.
I love that because on top of funding and
I love
capital,
what Seneca is saying now, but the thing is, are these corporates willing to put these investments?
Well, and this is the thing, and I think what we don't think about is that sometimes there's no investment, or the investment is very minimal, or it's an investment of time. That's all a lot of these founders need. They need the space and the time, and they can do the rest. So we have to be more flexible in our approach, and we have to be more open in how we're looking at these things, because it doesn't necessarily take a lot of investment. It just takes the space and the time.
Okay, and do you agree with that, Stwart?
Yeah, I was going to say that when I refer to investments in the capital, it doesn't have to be monetary capital. Sometimes
Exactly.
it's attention capital and time capital. At the end of the day, the big corporates have so much more knowledge because they operate at a different scale. For the entrepreneurship perspective, my world's a lot smaller, and my job is to actually try to learn as much as I can from the corporate, from the customers, what are the pain points. But sometimes, I do need someone to stand a hand to be able to help us to be able to scale up those technologies. So corporates that have the mission are the best partners that allow us to be able to reach bigger and bigger scale.
Yeah.
Saeed, from your experience, is it the private sector or is it the public sector that could make these big moves, especially what we're discussing now?
Interesting question. My sort of philosophy on it is that the theory of change, when we're talking about advancing any advancements in sort of human civilization, and we're talking about advancements to tackle resilience, climate, circularity, the private sector have to lead, because that's where the innovation and the investment.
The private sector.
The private sector will lead, but the private sector innovates and shows what's possible. And that, when I say the private sector, it's normally the first movers and the ones leading the way in the private sector, which will not be 100% of the market. You'll find about 5% of the market, which will be the ones that are driving that sort of change, innovation. Mm-hmm. The role then from policymakers and government, and this is where I say the feedback loop has to be faster, because technology is moving fast. The challenge is getting harder. We're a race against time with circularity and climate. We need to move quicker. Is that those advancements, those gains that the leaders in the private sector, the top 2 to 5% of what they're achieving, those gains that they've achieved need to be cemented across the 98% of the rest of the private sector. And the way you do that is you raise the bar through policy. If say for instance we get to an advancement where we're able to ensure, someone in the private sector is able to sort of achieve an advancement where we've reduced energy consumption in buildings down to, say, 40 kilowatt hours per square meter, and they've been able to prove that that's being feasible, financially viable. The way that you get the 98% of the rest of the sector to follow is, right, let's make that a policy. And then that encourages the private sector to advance even further. You raise the bar again with policy, and I think that's the feedback loop that I see in terms of the roles of the private and public sector. So maybe to answer your question, they both have an important part. The private sector need to lead the way, and the public sector need to drag everyone else along with them.
Amazing. It's always thought that it's the other way around. It's the public that they put the rules, and then the private they need to follow. But what you're saying, it is.
This is my philosophy.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. Saeed, let me stay with you on this point as well, especially like in your expertise, especially when it comes to green building standards. And I just want to ask you, I mean, are you seeing the risk of green building standards becoming just a kind of like a checklist for some in the different, areas that you are operating? And how do we make sure they really drive resilience?
Good question. Look, this is an area I've worked in for 15, 20 years about driving regulations and sort of around sustainable buildings, and I did it globally in my role previously as the chair, on the board of the World Green Building Council. And how do we raise the bar for building regulations? My personal opinion is that the term sustainable building regulations or green building regulations has an important place in a time where you need to create that change. But the most effective sustainable building codes are just integrated in the building code itself. You know, when you look at some of the sort of Scandinavian countries that have some of the highest performing sustainable buildings, they don't have per se a green building regulation or green building code. It's just integrated into the code. You've got the structural code, it's got energy requirements in there, insulation requirements, all the equipment that you have has to achieve certain efficiencies, and so on and so forth. So really, to get the best outcomes is that requirements just need to be integrated and simplified in the building codes. And the other sort of philosophy I have on it is that you need to keep things simple, but make them aggressive. And what I mean by that is it's not about creating 300 criteria that need to be achieved, because the market gets lost in that. And even the public sector, the government, has a hard time administering 300 different requirements. You've got to find out what is material, what is important. Is it water scarcity, is it energy, or whatever the areas are, and just target the heavy-hitting aspects that are going to yield the biggest results. Trim that down to a simplified number of criteria as possible, but administer them hard and make the criteria hard to achieve, and that's what will yield the outcomes. So, again, these are my sort of philosophies and learnings. There's other opinions which are definitely very valid as well, but from what I've sort of experienced of where I've seen outcome-based results, has been sort of following that approach.
Fantastic. Thank you, Saeed. Stwart, today, how do you convince large player that circular economy isn't just something nice to have, isn't this just like cherry at the top, but it is a core part of resilience? How do you convince them?
That's a really good question, and I think there's two specific examples in the last 5 years that I can bring up that can drive the circular economy is a requirement, not a nice to have. The first one is COVID. When COVID came, it disrupted global supply chains, and it made operations at a global scale quite difficult. And when you think of what the essence of circular economy is, it's basically using your local resources, the materials you had just finished using, whether it's your water bottles, your textiles, or your vehicles and so on, which are already domestically available, and being able to reutilize them for the original application. If you're able to accomplish that, you're able to shield yourself from a lot of the challenges that come from a very complex, integrated global supply chain. So that is one that it allows you to become a lot more resilient to the challenges that happen to the world. The second one is, I spun this technology out of MIT, based out of America, and recently we all know about the tariffs and the uncertainty that has happened from that perspective. And the reason that has such a big impact is, again, because of how integrated our supply chains are. If you're able to somewhat insulate yourself from that and create more domestic and local economies, which is what circular materials is all about, you are able to create more resilient economies, more resilient strategies, and just more resilient, way of operating in this world, which is becoming more and more difficult to navigate from an economical perspective, especially with the uncertainty. So what are the technologies that will win out at the end of the day? If you're able to domestically source those technologies, you're able to bring them out to the market, and it can actually create a much more global impact beyond just environment, but also economically for the nations that are able to best develop the circular economy technologies.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in on that one too, because I think I work for a very big corporate organization, and what it really boils down to is profit and loss, right? So when you look at circularity, like you said, circularity is about using your resources well. That's what it boils down to. And as a business, when you use your resources well, you save money. That's what it does. So from me, when I go to my leaders, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the practicality of this. This is about having a business that goes into the next 20, 40, 50 years, because we can't continue in this linear system and think that our business is going to continue in the same way that it's been going when we're depleting our resources. So it's really about profit and loss. It's how do we make more money through this process? How do we save money through this process? And that's what circularity brings to the corporate lens. That's the corporate lens that it has.
And this is what I think Stwart has been working on over the past few years, how to make it like cost efficient to be deployed. But since we're talking about behavior, Seneca, now, and since you're a retail group and it's me, Saeed, Stwart, and maybe 80% of the audience, they are clients of yours. Let's talk about the consumer behavior here for a moment. And it is a big part of resilience, isn't it? So how can companies like yours influence your consumer at scale?
Yeah. Well, consumers are the core of resilience because they're creating the demand, right? They're the ones who want the products and the services that we're providing. There was a study by BCG in 2021 in this specific region that talked about consumer nationals in the GCC, about their sentiment around sustainability. And one of the surprising things that I think came out of that is that about 70 to 80% of the respondents understand what sustainability is. They understand what climate change is, which is it's the same rate of understanding as in the US. And I think a lot of people, when they look at this region, they think, oh, they don't really understand in that region about climate change. That's not true. We do. We get it. But the challenge that they found is that we don't know what to do about it, right? And so it's our responsibility to bring that awareness to our customers, like what can they do about it? So the first thing we have to do is we as a company, we need to provide the products and services that are sustainable, that our customers want. And we have to do it in a way that's not just for sustainability's sake. We have to give our customers better products, better services. One of my professors for sustainable marketing said, and I use this now all the time, it's something that's drilled into my brain, is that sustainability is the gift with purchase. So we're providing you a better service, a better product, but you get sustainability as a gift. We give that to you as an extra. It's a freebie. And so that's how we have to look at it as retailers. We have to be looking at giving them the best product possible that just happens to be sustainable. And then we have to think about how do we educate them? Because that's another thing. Globally, there's a lot of terms that we throw around. What's sustainable? What's biodiversity mean? Customers don't understand these terms. So we have to educate our staff. And this is I'll be being very transparent. I often go into stores and the staff don't know me, so I go in and I ask questions. And I went into a store, and there was an organic cotton set of sheets for a baby, and there was a regular set of sheets next to each other. Same color, same everything. Everything was exactly the same. The only difference was on one, it said organic cotton, and it was more expensive. And I asked the salesperson in our store, why is this more expensive? They're exactly the same. Important thing, we have to educate our staff so that they can educate our customer on what these things mean and why they're actually better for them and why they demand a premium. And then finally, we have to use our technology to create loyalty, and we have to incentivize our customers to do the right thing. So we have a program at our body shop where if you bring back your used plastic containers to our store, we give you points. We say, yes, thank you for doing that, bringing that back, and then we will recycle it for you. We make it easy for them. Yeah. And so those are kind of the things that we have to think about to help our customers become more resilient, because without them, becoming more resilient, we can't create resilience.